Muchas gracias, Rubén, por tu espléndida.
Thank you, Ruben, for your magnificent talk and your ability to reply to all the questions that has shown something that I mentioned at the beginning, meaning this is an agora for debate. Like it was in Athens. And I remember one of the few images of what must have been a discussion in Athens. It's a picture by a painting by Rafael Deniense that depicts, that presents Plato at the core of the scene, that is discussing with Aristotle. And so we've had our current Plato, Ruben Simank, because you were explaining the principles and the ideas just like Plato did. And now we will have Aristotle, Mary Wachinger, and she will be the Aristotle who will be pointing towards, pointing beneath towards the bottom, because she will be talking about forms and levels of solidarity, something very specific in the European Union. Beyond catastrophes, beyond disaster cases. So this title was very inspiring, and the rest of the paper lives up to it. And Mary is very similar to Aristotle in the sense that she is an extraordinary, well-educated person, and just like Ruben, she's German. She has studied political sciences. She finished her PhD in political science and political theory at the Free University of Berlin in 2021 with a dissertation on solidarity in the European Union. She previously did an MSc in political theory at the LSE and a BA at Amsterdam University College. And she's already a doctor. She has already finished her thesis. And she has also worked at several research institutions, and she talks about something very explicit, the goal.
Prescription of solidarity on the EU level and discuss it critically. Y luego añade, I present
and she then adds,
as a type of relation and action at the same time, arguing that the relational aspect is underrepresented in the way that solidarity is portrayed in the EU discourse. Perfecto. Queremos entrar ahora ya en materia.
It is perfect. We have to go down and come down from the Platonic heavens and go down towards the floor with Aristotle. So thank you.
Buenas tardes a todos y todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by thanking you for awarding me the honor of receiving this Charles V Award grant and for giving me the opportunity of presenting my work here.
Miguel, dear Enrique, thank you so much for the kind introduction and the precious opportunity to present my work here. As you can see, my presentation is entitled Forms and Levels of EU Solidarity Beyond Disaster Cases. So it entails central thesis from my PhD dissertation, which I recently defended. And maybe to start with, I pose a first central question that I want to address. So this question is, how does the EU make use of the term solidarity? And how can it live up to its aim to, quote, confirm the solidarity which binds Europe and the overseas countries? So for this purpose, I chose the following structure for my presentation. First, I will say a couple of words about my method. And the reason why I do this is because we come from such diverse disciplinary backgrounds that even with all the similarities that Ruven and I share disciplinary, I think my approach is quite different, and I think it's very enriching to exchange these, and I will just explain my, the way that I approach this topic a little bit further. I will then continue with some excerpts and a short digression into the way that the term solidarity is used in the EU treaties. And then I will sort of move to a more, we can say, theoretical part of my paper. So the idea is that based on some previous conceptual understandings of solidarity, I will actually propose a normative view, first of all of the concept, but then in a last step, hopefully on an EU level. So how can we, or how should we see solidarity as a normative concept in the EU context? So first of all, I have three main elements to my method. So as I said, I will first of all take a look at the way that the word solidarity is used in the treaty text. And I do so mainly for the purpose to find out, what the purpose of the word is in the treaties. So is the idea of using solidarity to describe a certain status quo that we have as European citizens or member states or individuals living here, or does it have a prescriptive force? So is it meant to guide the way that we interact within this union of states? And if it has a prescriptive force, what exactly does it require us to do? And this brings me to my second point, the conceptual work about the term solidarity, and most importantly, its normativity. So I think we cannot look at solidarity without considering its strong normative character. So the way that everyone, or I think in almost all connotations solidarity evokes, it has a very positive character, and it not only receives much appraisal, but it's also something that we demand of each other. So by resorting to the work of the philosopher Christine Korsgaard, I say that we can describe normative questions as being concerned with claims rather than descriptions. So they are supposed to guide our actions and tell us what we ought to do. And this thought also guides the definition of solidarity I will propose in this section of my presentation. And then lastly, I will offer a conception of the EU that fits this definition of solidarity I propose. The idea is that we need to know more about the EU as a solidary community in order to be able to shape its potential for solidarity. My argument rests on the diagnosis that its current self-understanding of solidarity is not sufficient. In spite of all the positive news, I am convinced that in times of nationalist surges, Brexit, autocratic governments in some member states, we have to think about whether we really have reason to be so optimistic after all. So, first about the way solidarity is used in the EU treaties. So, it may be interesting, although not new to most of you, that throughout the process of European integration, the use of the term intensified. It intensified accordingly as a formerly mostly or purely economic project also became increasingly a political one. So we can have a look at the following quotes that I selected and that also Ruven already mentioned. So first of all, we have the preamble of the TEU, where it says, desiring to deepen the solidarity between their peoples while respecting their history, their culture, and their traditions. And then we have the Common Provisions Article 2, where it says, the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These values are common to the member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men prevail. Here we can already find two very different usages of the term. In the preamble, it is clearly used in a prescriptive way. We should deepen the solidarity. But in the second quote, we see that solidarity is considered an already existent value alongside others. For example, pluralism, tolerance, justice. This is a usage we can refer to as self-descriptive. Now, moving on to the next slide, I take a closer look at the Treaty of Lisbon, so basically around 15 years later on, and we find a novelty in it when it comes to the use of solidarity as a term. We, for the first time, see the term being used as a specific measure, a new legal instrument, namely the solidarity clause. And apart from that, of course, also the term is used in a variety of contexts and with more and more frequent referrals to it. But so what is the solidarity clause? It reads as follows. The Union and its member states shall jointly act in a spirit of solidarity if a member state is the object of a terrorist attack or the victim of a natural or man-made disaster. The Union shall mobilize all instruments at its disposal. The resulting action is to be coordinated by the member states through the Council. And then, in the adjacent Declaration 37, it says, none of these provisions is intended to affect the right of another member state to choose the most appropriate means to comply with its own solidarity obligation. So, as you might know by now, this solidarity clause is what inspired the title of my presentation. So, of course, the choice of having very extreme situations as a basis for this very new and innovative legal instrument can be explained by the temporal context, because the solidarity clause was introduced after the bombings in Madrid in 2004. But it still seems striking to me that the name refers to a principle that, seen in context of the other usages that I presented before, by no means limited to catastrophic incidents. We could wonder, why is the solidarity clause not actually called the disaster clause or the catastrophe clause? And if we think about Declaration 37, the second quote, we could also read this as a cautious reminder that member states are not quite bound, that there is always the possibility to step back from a joint commitment and act in a spirit of national sovereignty. And then, of course, based on these referrals in the treaty text, we may or may not be surprised by the way the term is used in actual political practice. So, of course, there's the already mentioned example of migration, and I would just like to mention two incidents. One of them is the phenomenon of the proposed return sponsorships as a measure of solidarity, where the actual idea behind them is to for member states to assist financially in the deportation of refugees to countries of origin. And secondly, the current situation at the Belarusian border, of course, where the German foreign minister just days ago said that, well, we have to show solidarity with Poland. But, well, is it actually Poland that we have to show solidarity with, or is it the people that are freezing in the forests there, right? So migration is just one example, I think, in political practice where the term solidarity is increasingly used. There are other ones, for example, the Euro crisis, where solidarity was talked about between member states. There's also the, of course, already mentioned pandemic, in which we can wonder whether we really, as a first impulse, had a reaction of solidarity in Europe when the borders closed down immediately. So, all in all, what I think I want to just get at with this example is that we need to know a bit more about what solidarity is, because otherwise we risk that it can be sometimes used in a misleading, last resort appeal way, or even cynical way, I think. So the questions that I put on the left of the slide, I think, remain unanswered. So, who is in solidarity with whom? Where does solidarity end? What is solidarity for the morally right purpose? And this is why I think we need to know a bit more about solidarity from the start. I would just like to briefly refer to some of the previous literature on solidarity, and much of it has already been mentioned by Ruben before, of course. So, as he mentioned, Emil Durkheim was, of course, path-breaking in the way that he conceptualized solidarity as social cohesion. There's also the work of Jürgen Habermas, who actually conceptualized solidarity as the reverse side of justice, saying that while justice is actually a concept that is concerned with universal rights and claims, but of individuals, solidarity is concerned with collective action. We have more recent work by Tommy Shelby, who wrote about solidarity as a fight against a shared type of oppression, Andrea Sangiovanni, whom Ruben already mentioned, Sally Schultz, who writes about political solidarity as a response to situations of injustice. So what I propose in the next section of my presentation is to arrive at a definition of solidarity that focuses on its function in society. So I'm not so much concerned with finding a historical essence of the term, because also, as we have seen before, historically the term has sometimes been used in even opposing ways. There's, of course, the socialist tradition, but there's also the Catholic one, there's the nationalist tradition, and one may wonder whether we can arrive at a sort of historically essentialist definition at all. So it's for this reason that all that I'm going to say from now on is concerned with the function that solidarity can have in society, and the distinction also from other concepts that are related to it. So here comes my definition of solidarity. I base it on a rather neutral idea. This neutral idea that I base it on encompasses all types of solidarity in definitions that we come across. It is the idea of standing up for each other. Standing up for each other has two elements. It has the element of the other and the standing up. And it is those two elements that also guide my definition. So the definition I would like to propose reads as follows. Solidarity as a specific type of social relation, so the other is the relational element, and it's a political action, which is the standing up element. So first, a relation of solidarity, so what sometimes is called the community of solidarity, is non-coercive. It is located outside the private sphere, and it can be actively shaped. And second, solidary action is political, by which I mean that its matters must be of public concern, it must aim to make a statement, and it must show orientation towards change. And the third step of my definition refers to the evaluation of desirability of cases of solidarity, and I will explain more about this, what I mean with this in a second. So, with regard to the three elements of my definition, I will now present them in more detail. So, of course, I start with the relational element. The question that we can ask in order to define this relational element better is, what makes me concerned about the other? And as also Ruben pointed out, solidarity is an essentially modern concept. So the way that I propose to see solidarity is as a relation to mediate between the individual and society. But what does this community of solidarity look like? Normatively speaking, I think we should think about solidary communities not to be based on what I propose to call antecedent characteristics. What are antecedent characteristics? They are things like, for example, the place where we are born, our nationality, our biological sex, our skin color. These are contingent features. And the reason why I propose them not to be suitable features of solidarity communities is because these, as such, they don't produce similar ideas about why we and how we should act in solidarity together. So in other words, just because I am a white person, I don't have enough in common to say with other white persons about how I want to shape our society. There has to be something more. Second, solidary relationships. They don't, in my opinion, have to be necessarily perfectly symmetric, because there can usually be instances of solidarity where one person has much more capability to act in solidarity with another one, just by mere sometimes coincidence or, the situational context that we live in. But solidarity has a symmetrical element in the sense that we need to have solidary agents to possess some readiness to contribute. So even if right now I am in need of solidarity by someone else, the idea is that if I am in the future in a situation where I can act in solidarity with someone else, I will do so. I also require solidarity to be inclusive. So in the literature, there's usually a distinction made between solidarity with and solidarity among. So solidarity among means, well, I'm in a solidary community with other individuals who are in a similar situation, so we are among each other. Whereas the idea of solidarity with means that someone from the outside can also be in solidarity. So to give an example, in a feminist setting of solidarity, we can think about men who are also in solidarity with women for feminist reasons, for example. So of course the inclusivity requirement poses questions. For example, how large can a solidary community be? And we already talked about this before, the difficulty of universal solidarity. So the way that I propose to see this is that, well, we don't have an actual fixed limit to solidarity or to solidary communities in terms of size. But I think that if we think about the aim that solidarity should have in a very large context, for instance, it should be rather limited. So I think if we think about a very small community of, let's say, very few people who are in solidarity with each other, we can have a rather large and encompassing project of solidarity. But if we move to a very large realm, for example, a European one, I think our aims should be rather limited for several reasons. For example, for the reason that if we are in a very large context, we may have different fractions and different ideas of how to go about a solidary project, and some voices may dominate others within. Moving to the second question, so recall that there's the relational element and there's the practical element of solidary action. We may ask the question, what does it mean to stand up for the other? And the way that I see it, we can speak about the aims or the projects of solidarity as matters of solidarity, and I think these should be political. Political, of course, is not straightforwardly defined, but the way that I propose to define it is that a matter that is political has to be of concern to everyone. Of course, this doesn't mean to everyone in the same extent, but it has to be something that is beyond our personal aspirations and our very intimate sphere. So in this definition of the political, I resort to an understanding inspired by Hannah Arendt, who sees the political as a space in which we become active. And it's also a dynamic space in which things change and evolve. And I think this goes for solidary action as well. The second element of actions of solidarity I propose is that these should have a statement character. So what I mean to say with statement character is that acting in solidarity is not merely something that I do in this moment and that's where it ends. No, I think solidarity wants to expose an underlying problem, and it wants to also be visible where possible. So with solidarity, we usually want to create something where an actual change can be made, which is the transformative character of solidarity, which is my third point. And the reason why we want to have the statement character as well is because it creates reliability. And here I return to the notion of reciprocity that was already mentioned before, because I think while solidarity doesn't have to be strictly reciprocal, I think, well, by making solidarity a sort of visible concept, we also create the visibility in which reciprocity can establish itself, and well, those that see that solidarity is actually happening then also may expect that it might happen to them as well, should they be in a situation where they need it. Turning to the third element of my definition of solidarity, which I call the evaluation of solidarity. let me just say before that I think it is sometimes not talked enough about undesirable cases of solidarity. So we many times have a very positive image of solidarity, but as also already has been mentioned, there may be instances in which solidarity is not desirable at all, for example, in a nationalist context maybe, or well, we can think about the most horrible things that are done in the name of solidarity, or that claim for themselves to be solidarity, instances of solidarity. So how do we go about these? I think, of course, there's no truth about well, the deontic force of solidarity in well, establishing a sort of universal ethics, but I think we can think about different reasons why people act in solidarity, and then evaluate these accordingly. So first, of course, what I called previously the matters of solidarity. So the instances or the aims that we actually follow with our actions and communities of solidarity, we can ask, are they ethical? Then there are the reasons that people or individuals have to join in solidarity, and we can ask if they are desirable. So I distinguish three main types of reasons. The first ones I call end-related reasons. So we may think about something like right? So we could say that justice or racial justice would be the end, and the idea is that people join in solidarity in order to achieve it. So this is something that can be evaluated from an ethical point of view. Second, many times agents join in solidarity for what we can call instrumental reasons, so maybe to improve their personal situation in society or also individually. And we can also evaluate those kinds of reasons of joining. So for example, if I am affected by, let's say, unjust working conditions, and I fight in a solidary way to change these, we might consider these to be instrumental reasons. And the third set of reasons, I think, is very specific of solidarity, which I call reasons of recognition, based on the work of Axel Honneth, the philosopher. We can see solidarity as a space in which agents experience mutual recognition. There is a sense of belonging that is more than just acting together. No, there's something that I see myself in the other while I act in solidarity. So as I said before, the way that I came to this definition of solidarity is by determining its societal function, and the reason or the way that I did this was also by locating it among related concepts. And I think it's sometimes useful to think about these, and we also already spoke about some of these. So as you can see, we can somehow find, of course, many other relational concepts such as love and friendship, charity, loyalty, altruism, nationalism, justice, and I sort of put these in a line that goes from the three criteria that you can see at the bottom from sort of one extreme to the other, and of course, the way I located solidarity there somewhere is just an indicator of where I find it to be located, but I can say a few more words about this. So, for example, the first criterion is agent neutrality versus agent relativity. So if we think about a relationship of love or friendship, of course, the other agent is of central importance, whereas in a relation of justice, where we are talking about universal claims, we have a rather agent-neutral relationship. And solidarity is, I think, rather to the agent-neutral side, although not completely. And then the second criterion is the intimate versus public sphere, and I think the same goes for solidarity. It's outside our intimate sphere of relations, so it's not comparable to a relationship of friendship. but it's also not as neutral as justice. And then, as you can see, also charity, which was already mentioned before, possesses some, I think, substantial differences to solidarity, for example, with regard to the question of agency. But we can also talk more about this maybe later in the discussion. And then, of course, there's the question of particularist versus universal, where I also locate solidarity rather to the more universal side, but not completely, not as justice or redistribution. So, continue. Because this was a lot of conceptual work and information, I thought it makes sense to, before I move to the actual EU realm again, to consider one successful example of solidarity, which I just came across last week, and because it's also from Spain, I thought it would be just interesting. Of course, there are many, many examples of successful solidarity that fit the criteria that I laid out. But the one that I suggest here, it's the case of Sindicat, which is a civil society initiative in Barcelona that aims to counteract the housing crisis and also to support people who are in threat of evictions from their houses. So. Well, we can see in this case people fulfill the criteria of a solidary relation because they, as we can see in this very small, not very good screenshot that I chose there, they say, you are not alone, you're not alone. So they are in a sort of relation where they mutually recognize each other, where there's some notion of reciprocity. So if I am under the same threat as you, I will support you and you will support me. The matter that they are addressing is, of course, of relevance to the public because the housing crisis and the larger context of inequality is of public concern. And lastly, their actions are political in the sense that they are not only visible, they also make a statement character. They go to the streets, demonstrate, and they are aimed at making change. But while this is a successful example of solidarity, we can also wonder what is solidarity, or in which ways solidarity is insufficient. So while we are talking here about a civil society initiative, we may wonder, is a civil society initiative enough to make the substantial change that is necessary? And the reason, and I think this problem, we cannot call it a problem or a potential of solidarity, I think applies to most cases. So where should we locate solidarity when it comes to the claims that we make for a better future? Is solidarity the answer to all our problems, or is it just one component, and maybe we should have a more modest idea about what and how much solidarity can achieve? So now I'm moving to the final section of my presentation, and I'm returning again to the European Union. Once again, methodologically, I would like to stress that what I'm aiming to do is to find a normative depiction of the EU that would fit the definition of solidarity that I proposed. So, can we find a fit between this idea of solidarity that I have and the EU, or can we not? And if so, is there a chance for the EU to offer potential for solidarity the way that I define it after all? And I think a closely linked question that I think to my method is also something that that follows my diagnosis of the political reality, which is how can we avoid an idea of Europeanness that is exclusionary, that is nationalist, that is based on antecedent characteristics, the way that I defined them in the beginning. So many times we talk about European identity, and well, as I tried to point out in the beginning, this notion is problematic, and I am not so sure or convinced that it is the right one to go about when thinking about a European solidary community. And so what I propose instead is an idea of Europeanness that is based on various factors, which I am just going to briefly mention here, and in which I base my thoughts on the work of Paul Valéry and Edmund Husserl, because I want to take into account the complexity of Europe as a continent in historical terms, but also in current terms as a political project with the European Union, which is of course only part of Europe. There's also Europe that is not part of the Union, and how should we deal with that? So, the idea of Europeanness, as I said, I borrow it from Paul Valéry, and the idea is that we think about Europeanness, or the way that I would propose it, as a normative ideal. So we need to take into account the history of Europe and the European Union. We cannot disregard the fact that the Holocaust happened. We cannot disregard the colonial past of Europe. And so we need to think about a basis for European solidarity that takes these into consideration. But I think we should not think about European solidarity as a way to compensate for the past, because there is no compensation, and if so, I think solidarity is not a strong enough tool. But I think we can still think about a Europeanness. And here I would like to refer to the work of Jan Patočka, who talks about the solidarity of the shaken as an idea of shared experience of, what happened in the past, and a sort of idea of, okay, this can never happen again, and so we need to commit to a Europeanness that is inclusive and that is somehow directed at the future. And in this context, of course, it is important to mention that the European Union integration process bears a lot of potential for this. So, first of all, of course, while at first being an economic union, it did manage to bring about political integration and become a social union. And of course, most importantly, it's the first successful attempt at a peaceful European continent, which was notoriously at war. And this is also something that Juan Carlos pointed out in his opening speech. So if we think about solidary agency, so I'm not now going to go back to the levels of solidarity that I proposed in my definition. So the idea of agency and of relation, and the idea of action. So when we now first speak about the idea of solidary agency in the European Union, we can think about several levels. So not all of these fit my definition of solidarity, and I think the fact that they don't will be also a basis for an interesting discussion to have afterwards. So of course we have individuals as agents in the European Union, and here I think we have to think about European citizens, but also other people that live in the European Union, and that's why I propose to call them solidary agents, because we can include people who maybe do not possess the status of citizenship. Then, of course, we have the level of the national governments of the member states, and we have the EU institutions above them. So what I would propose, following from the definition of solidarity that I presented, is that actually only the first one, only the individual level, can be suitable European Union solidary agents. And I'm going to explain why a bit more, because I think it's a controversial claim to make. So these are the reasons why I exclude both national governments and also EU institutions from being suitable agents of solidarity. Yes, the first one is, of course, the problem of relations between institutions. Can relations possess the same relational character as individuals can? Can they experience mutual recognition? Can they experience a sense of belonging? I think it's very difficult to think that way. I think we can think about exceptions, for example, very homogeneous NGOs or interest groups that are based on the idea of the idea of a shared struggle for something. But I think also, ontologically speaking, state institutions, their aim is a different one. Their aim is not to convey a sort of homogeneity, but rather to balance out competing interests, right? The second reason, I think, is non-coercion, which I think, well, in this context of institutions, I think it's difficult to think about solidarity in an institutional context in a non-coercive way, because I cannot simply declare myself not to be member of a state anymore, for example, whereas I think in a solidary relationship there should be this element of voluntary entry and exit. The third reason is the inclusivity requirement that I mentioned before. Recall the distinction between solidarity with and among. And here, looking at the European Union, I'm mostly thinking about its outside. So, of course, the term would be Fortress Europe, or the danger of exclusion towards its outside. I think it's difficult to conceive of a institutional basis in which can be really inclusive towards its outside. Then, of course, questions are connected to this overarching topic, whether institutions can be solidary agents, because how would we decide on which matter of solidarity we are concerned with? And how do we distinguish them from other ways in which state institutions act? So what distinguishes an act of solidarity of a state institution from an act, let's say, for example, of justice? So what I propose instead, in order to meet also the obvious problem that the term solidarity is many times associated to state institutions, for example, in the welfare state, is that I propose solidarity as an initiator of change. So this is a way to include institutions, because I think we can see solidarity as a sort of initiator of initiatives against, let's say, for example, injustice, oppression, and so on. And then state institutions can solidify these into, let's say, justice or redistribution, as in, for example, the welfare state. And when coming back to the European Union, of course, I think the EU institutions, we can see them as providers of a frame within which solidarity can take place. For example, by providing the status of citizenship, but not only. So, lastly, some words on the type of solidarity actions that we can think about in the EU. I find there to be three types of concerns that these can tackle. Those that are non-EU specific, so we can think about solidarity in general about against, for example, climate injustice, or more general forms of injustice that apply on a non-EU specific level. Then we can think about EU specific concerns of solidarity as a matter of institutional setup. So, for example, if we think about a specific law or a specific context that deserves solidarity in the EU context. And thirdly, we can think about, of course, the most complex cases that we can call EU-specific as a matter of, for example, Europeanness. So they are not related directly to the institutional context, but there's something about Europe that makes them EU or European-specific. In sum, I think if we look at this sort of picture, yes, I'm almost done, we can see solidarity as a component within a large apparatus of relations and actions, but not as a solution to all problems. And secondly, we can also think about the parallel existence of many, many different types of solidarity next to each other. So lastly, to conclude, I would like to return to the initial question that I posed in the beginning. So 3 problems remain if we accept the grid that I propose for European Union solidarity. So of course, first, the question of agency. So can institutions really not be agents, or is it sufficient what I propose to be their role within solidarity? Then second, the problem of overly ambitious solidarity projects. So even if we take this understanding of Europeanness to be very narrow, is that already too ambitious? And third, on a more positive note, also the unique potential for EU solidarity. So we do have the means to facilitate solidarity also of the kind that I propose, and also create links within the EU for truly solidary practices. So, for example, things to discuss would be the EU Solidary Corps, which already uses the name, but also the EU Cohesion Fund can be considered maybe an instrument of this, and it would be really interesting to discuss in what ways these can be considered important steps on the way. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Marie.
Thank you, Mary, for sticking to the time you had allocated. Your paper was very well structured and argumented, so it shows that behind the paper there is a fully fledged researcher that is able to propose matters and arguments and to explain them and justify them. I'm not going to comment on all the things that you have suggested. Some of them can be, some of the things that I could say, I already mentioned them when commenting on Ruben's paper. But you have talked about the relational notion. And I liked what you said about the solidarity agency and solidarity agents, that your notions that you have coined. So I invite you to break the ice and start firing questions in a good sense, of course, so that we can identify virtues and strengths of your paper, or maybe some things that need improvement. Yeah, I have the microphone. When you want to make a comment, please raise your hand so that you can get mic. Marie, congrats for your intervention. That was brilliant. And I was very happy because I was happy to see that you mentioned some things that I'm going to mention in mine. I would like to talk about the solidarity clause. I would like to know your view on it, to see if we share the same idea. So you talked about solidarity in conceptual terms, and then you talked about it in practical terms. And I want to focus on the practical issues. You've talked about the solidarity clause, and I agree with you that it could have been called the armed aggression clause or catastrophe clause, because that is the aim of that clause. But many authors have analyzed that the solidarity clause is not triggered by the states, not in a recurring way, of course. There must be some requirements, there must be some conditions to use it. But the states are reluctant to trigger the solidarity clause. The clause exists because we can find it in the texts, but it is not triggered by default. So solidarity does not come on its own or automatically. The state has to trigger it, has to call for it. And many authors have evidenced the reluctance of the states to use it, to activate it. So my question is, in your opinion, what are the reasons for the states not to trigger it? Maybe a lack of trust in that clause. a lack of confidence in using it, or is it because of the mechanism that is required to activate it when there is a threat, be it human-led catastrophe or a natural catastrophe? So I would like to focus on the reluctance, on why the member states are reluctant to trigger that clause. Because that affects their sovereignty and the ability of others to trespassing the borders and to enter member states' territory. So I'd like to know your opinion about it. Because I have my opinion, but I would like to know yours, and I want to, of course, broaden my opinion about it. And that's it. Because, of course, we could talk for hours about the solidarity clause, and even more so if we talk about the mechanisms that the states have when deciding when to trigger or not the use of that clause. I will be talking about it in my talk. But I would like to reflect upon why the states are so reluctant to use the mechanisms that exist. Because the mechanisms are great on paper, but why are they not using them? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is it okay if I repeat right away? Yes, okay. So, yes, great question, and for sure you know much more about this, the specific literature around the solidarity clause than I do, but I think what is at the bottom line of this question is in a way the inherent, the inherent division between sovereignty and joint political project here, right? So there's always this tension between member states and European Union level, and I think what might be a contributing factor for not actually activating the solidarity clause, both from the affected states' point of view, but also from the other ones that would be providing solidarity, could be a fear of loss of sovereignty, right? And also a fear of maybe something some people would call hegemonic behavior, right? So the first of the possible reasons that you were sort of implying, that maybe there's a fear associated to interference, right, from the outside. And I think it's a very valid concern, because of course we cannot disregard the power imbalances within a political project like the European Union, right? I mean, there are always going to be member states much more powerful than others, or maybe it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like that, but I think in the status quo it is the case, and I think this bears a danger for let's say, maybe hegemonic is a little bit too strong of a term, but of dominating behavior of some over others. And the way that I think it's a possibility in your question is that maybe if we think about, for example, the Eurozone crisis and economic policies, this sometimes has been the case, and some member states have been accused of this type of behavior. So how can we create also the confidence that solidarity is not something that will be used in a sort of dominating manner, and also how can we sort of maybe tackle this tension of sovereignty, because of course, even psychologically speaking, holding on to member state solidarity, there are for sure reasons why member states do that, right? And so we need to think about in which contexts it makes sense to give up sovereignty, and in which contexts, we need to hold on to it, right?
Muchas gracias en primer lugar por tu exposición.
Thank you for your talk, because it was very enriching for me. Personally, I have learned very much, and you have talked about very interesting matters, for example, and I liked it when you mentioned, when acting in solidarity, how we see something in the other that we can see in ourselves. And that is important when applying solidarity, not at an individual level, but also at a state level. So I liked it when you talked about the other, the otherness. I've always felt attracted by that notion, and I learned much from you. You said about, you gave some examples about migration issues that were interesting to me too at the beginning of your talk. You mentioned the proposals for the new covenant for asylum and immigration, the return sponsorships, and how in this new proposal we see a new notion of solidarity that has been dubbed the flexible solidarity. We can act in solidarity, but we don't know if that will benefit those affected, the people affected, meaning in this case migrants and asylum seekers that come to the European Union. Or that maybe that flexible solidarity is a way to avoid their responsibilities, which is something that is common to the successive proposals for the asylum migration policies. And I also liked it when you talked about the words by the German ministry about the border between Belarus and Poland, because those really affected are the people who are staying there in the border, and the solidarity with the third countries that are at our doors, that have an excessive power of negotiation, not just we can say not just in the crisis in Poland, but also in the border between Greece and Turkey and Morocco and Spain in Ceuta. We have grown accustomed, used to this type of borders, and we have become used to this type of issues at the European borders. And sometimes we forget that the people that are really affected by them are the people. And when Morocco really decides to open its borders to let children enter Spain, and when Turkey requires or demands more money, this is something really that should touch us, that should move us. So I have a very pessimistic vision, but I would like to know, how do you see the European solidarity in these kinds of situations with asylum seekers and migrants? Because if we look at this solidarity, which is a legal duty at the same time, how can we see it? It is important, as you were saying, to define the notion so that we can understand it rightly. That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, I completely agree when it comes to your diagnostic of the use of the term. And I think your question is mostly, if I would have to sort of reformulate it in very simple terms, is solidarity enough, right? I mean, when we are thinking about, I completely share your opinion about the idea that we need to think about whom we are in solidarity with. Is it actually the refugees themselves who need our solidarity the most, or are we? Can we call it an act of solidarity to reinforce our EU border by sending money to Poland, for example? So I agree that there is we need to have first of all, a clearer view of what solidarity is, and then I think we need to be also clear where it is being misused as a term. But to return to your final question, whether solidarity is enough, and in these terrible situations that I think should really not be occurring, I think actually no. I think we need to go beyond solidarity here. I think we need institutions of justice. We need to have the possibility for refugees, legally, they already have a right to asylum, right? But they need to have stronger, I think, means to claim their rights. And I think here solidarity is not enough, because I think solidarity of course, it's a step on the way, and we need, of course, activism. We need support. We need solidarity action to support people in these situations. But I think on a larger scale, we need something more reliable. And I think, from my, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but from my point of view, this could be found in institutions of justice that are easier to then also complain when they are not being fulfilled, because solidarity, I think it's somehow a little bit vague, and then it's difficult to say, well, I have a right to solidarity. Do I have a right to solidarity? No. If I can claim that I have a right to have a fair process of asylum, for example, then I can defend myself better. So I think in that sense we need more.
Felicidades, Marie, por tu exposición.
Congratulations, Marie, for your presentation, because you open many boxes. You explain everything really well, but for academical thought and reflection, you open many different doors, and I want to congratulate you for that. I wanted to ask to make a couple of contributions or suggestions in connection to two topics that are closely connected to the title of your work, on the levels of solidarity and its levels. When you detail the different parts of solidarity, you talk about individual action, the agents, the people in the European Union enacting solidarity, then you talk about national agents, and then you talk about European institutions. That made me thought about something that came up and that we have discovered, something that we have been able to analyze further. That is how the interinstitutional level between European institutions is very important. Because indeed, when the COVID-19 tsunami happened, and suddenly we had to rethink the European Union looked at itself in a mirror and it had to react. At that point, when citizens, first in Italy, asked for help, and they asked for a quick reaction by the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen was in a plenary session that was almost empty. Most members of parliament were absent because they were following online, and she apologized to Italian citizens for not having reacted sooner. But what many citizens did not know, and this is something connected to communications, is that the European Union doesn't have any health competences. So the European Union had to look for a way to act in that maze of interinstitutional relationships. So I think it would be interesting to elaborate on that interinstitutional action level, because our members of parliament, our representative democracy, was able to launch a message to the European Commission, to our European government, to the European Commission, to receive this message and sit at the European Council to tell the chiefs of state that that's the government of the EU and that they had to agree. So those three levels of the three institutions had to agree. And then we had all that interinstitutional maze, and it was necessary to navigate that, to give a response in terms of recovery funds and vaccines, etc. So that would be very interesting in connection to your work. I also want to say that I think you should delve more into the multi-level European governance, because we were talking about decision-making, political process, integration, European integration process, constant renewal of this process. We are talking about a multi-level European governance, and that's how it is included in the white paper of 2001. And we are an example. So we have all those concentrical circles of how that governance is connects the local, regional, national aspects, and how that is connected at its turn with the European aspects. And you can even get to the globalization governance, the multi-level governance of this multilateral governance of this chessboard in this huge jigsaw puzzle where geopolitical pieces keep being shuffled. So we have those three levels, and I think they're very correct. And I would add an addenda on interinstitutional aspects, and I would also add the European multi-level governance.
I wrote it down immediately. I think it's really useful for me to add, and also now while I was listening to you, I thought maybe these sort of new levels or different kind of realms, if we are talking about interinstitutional realm and multi-level governance, maybe these or their competencies also grow according to the crisis we live in, right? So if you think about COVID-19, maybe this type of response, because of lack of actual opportunity, just didn't happen before. So it's really useful for me to think about this as a sort of additional factor. Thank you.
Rubén, tienes la palabra.
Ruben, you have the floor.
I think it was super interesting. Actually, my first question was taken already, so I had the same point about the solidarity clause. I would argue it's kind of rather an example of reluctance rather than an actual application of it. But so the first question I had was philosophical, and then I have a more policy-oriented one. The first one is what you, if you could explain what your sort of take on the relationship between functionalism and normative theory is, because you said you want to do a functional analysis and a functional take on the term, and then I wasn't really sure what that would imply, because you originally at least didn't really say that member states would be part of that. For example, a state generally as an actor for solidarity would not really be possible, because it wouldn't fall under that definition. But on a functional sense, I would say, well, they kind of de facto argue that they do in a way act in solidarity. There's also on a philosophical level, of course, a danger of, I would say, well, let's say conformatism, because once you say something is functionally valuable and then deduce a normative sense of it, then it might just mean that everything is really good as it is, you know. That's at least I wanted to ask what you, I'm sure that's not what you mean, but I wasn't so sure about that. And then second, more maybe a comment, I thought it was super interesting that you referred to Hannah Arendt in this context. Like, she very, very rarely uses the term solidarity, and also in a very specific sense. So mainly on revolution, if I'm not correct, she says that it's not part of emotions, but relates to reason and can enter the marketplace and mobilize people. It's also a very specific text of hers, of course, but there I would also say that's not necessarily a functional sense of it at all. It's kind of, from my perspective, it's a very different point of view, so I wasn't sure what you think about this. And the last quick point, kind of similar to the solidarity clause. So one of your examples was the new pact on migration. I was wondering if you would say that that fits your definition, because, I mean, that's a very specific area of policy that mainly refers to Article 80, and there, and you know more about the asylum pact, but I mean, it mainly means, solidarity really means relocation there. I mean, it's really like, and I would say that relocation and flexible solidarity is precisely not what you, I think, want to say what solidarity is. That's at least my sense, and I wanted to ask if you would say that solidarity at all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Ruben. With regard to the first question, I think maybe I didn't make it so clear that in a way my functionalist approach, I think it's mostly in order to distinguish it from a historical deduction of the meaning of solidarity. So what I decided not to do is to think about solidarity as something whose meaning we can purely, of course there's always a historical dimension to defining it, but I think it's difficult to purely deduce it from its historical usages, because precisely they've been so diverse, and sometimes it's hard to find maybe some, or at least for me, to see the common ground between something like a Catholic notion of solidarity as we are all children of God next to a socialist understanding of it. So I think that's what I aimed at with this terminology. And with regard to Hannah Arendt, yes, I know this quote that you're referring to. I was quite surprised that she hardly ever refers to solidarity specifically, but I think this quote is beautiful, where she says that solidarity partakes of reason. So I think I'm a bit divided on this question, and I think what I introduced with the sort of notion of recognition is this kind of element of belonging, right? But I do think we have to. I don't think that solidarity is a purely rational exchange. I think there is something like an idea of community, even though it may be very, very loose or based on very specific things. And it doesn't mean that my fellow solidary agents are friends of mine at all. But I think there is a bond, and in that sense, I am, I have a bit of a different take than Hannah Arendt. And yes, with regard to the return sponsorships, well, of course, the way or the reason why I chose this is precisely to say that, if we talk about solidarity merely as relocation, then we shouldn't use that term because it's just so dangerous to do so. And we are, I think, destroying so much by doing that.
Gracias, Marie. La última palabra, porque ya está.
Thanks, Marie. This is the last word because we are reaching the end of the panel. So Elena has the last word. She gets the floor. Okay, we have more time. We have a little more time. I thought I was trying to follow the agenda strictly.
Quite interesting. And you did touch upon the individual level, and this is something that I want to follow up on. And my question is, because you did talk about normative and ethics and Europeanness, and that is my question, because it does in a way imply some kind of universal values and cohesiveness and homogeneity. And we do know that European is not a single homogeneous unit, that history, people are experiencing their everyday life based on some kind of historical background, where they're from, as well as social economic. So you do have people with different values, different goals. So when you do talk about this normative ethics, homogeneous universal values, how do you propose we overcome over our differences that are, historically or social economically bounded? And then how do we create these normative values, and who will be in charge of them? Because again, are they universal?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question, and I think, of course, I'm not the one who's deciding what Europeanness is either, of course. But I think it's perfectly possible to think of Europeanness as a Europeanness of difference, and I think that's what I aim to do also. So I don't think that we need to fall into the trap of homogeneity by seeing Europeanness as a shared commitment to something that has to consider its past, right? And I think that's my main point about this, is that while we cannot, of course, ignore what happened in the past and on so many levels, if we sort of translate this into an idea of Europeanness, in my view, it has to be one of diversity and of commitment to diversity. I mean, that's also the entire idea of the EU as a political project, right? So I think there's no contradiction in that, but of course, we are talking about a normative paper and not about the institutionalization of an idea of solidarity. So, of course, there will be different ideas about that, and I think that's something that I also struggle with in this conceptual work, and which I try to also point out in this idea of, what about undesirable cases of solidarity? Because we don't have an authority, of course, to decide. But I think it can be just helpful to keep it in mind, and in the end, we are all authors of our normativities, right?
Sí, muchas gracias, Enrique, y muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Enrique, and thanks so much, Marie. It was a great presentation. It was very well structured, very thorough, and it complements very well the presentation by the previous speaker, by Ruben. It elaborates on some issues. It goes to the specific precisely when it comes to the examples that are necessary in this type of presentations. The same thing I told Ruben in line with the final paper. I think there are those two aspects that have affected us the most lately: the pandemic and the conference on the future of Europe. In your case, in a more practical way, more in relation with the examples of the actions that have been carried out. And there's another aspect that is connected. You talked about concept, you also talked about the different realms of solidarity, and there's a message that I'm taking home about your presentation, and that is that solidarity does not work by itself. It is connected to other intrinsical instruments and that are intrinsic to Europe. You have been talking about the solidarity clause and how it is implemented by different countries. Solidarity is not a concept that can be applied under specific parameters. It is implicit in other parameters, and this is probably something that could be elaborated further. You talked about the the rationality of solidarity that is implicit in humans. With this in mind, this morning, and I'm sorry to connect this to the current situation, I want to talk about Belarus again. I saw some images of how a baby was buried under the snow, and how that is used as blackmailing. Another colleague talked about Morocco and the borders, our borders with Morocco, and the colleague just talked about Poland. There's something that could be analyzed in connection with the future, because I think this is a milestone. We are talking about the solidarity that Europe can offer to blackmail Europe. The European Commission said that we have to distinguish between natural catastrophes, and when talking about natural catastrophes, it wasn't just talking about an earthquake or the volcano in La Palma, floodings or fires. Those are situations that could trigger European action. And then we have human or man-made situations like wars. And we have those on the one hand, and then we have another actions that could be manipulated or could be caused. It's not things that are natural, but produced or fabricated to blackmail the European Union. I think the president of the European Commission talked about this, I think this morning or yesterday, and she talked about the different reactions of solidarity. And this can be concerning because at the end of the day, those that can be affected the most are people, based on how the European Union reacts. I think we should take into account another parameter, which is the origins of solidarity, because the European Union must react in solidarity. I don't know if this is maybe an observation that you could factor in your research.
I'm determined to include the pandemic in my final draft, and I think what will especially help me is the additional level of interinstitutional governance that we were talking about before. So thanks for that, of course. Well, with regard to Belarus, of course, I think it's already such a problem to sort of put natural and human disasters or humanitarian disasters in even one sentence. I think we need to differentiate. I'm not sure whether I'm very optimistic about the idea of a before and an after with regard to what's happening right now, because if we recall the image of the little boy Alan Kurdi, we also, I don't think, substantially changed our solidarity practices after that. But with regard to the point about why the European Union should act in solidarity, I think this brings me also back to the idea of Europeanness, because I think, of course, I think if we, in my view of Europeanness, this would always have to be a central factor that, well, we need to treat humans in dignity, and in the same way that, well, children were saved out of Nazi Germany, nowadays we need to save children that are at the EU border.
Muchas gracias, Marie.
Thank you very much, Marie. With this response, we are going to wrap up this first and very intense panel. All of us here spoke, and that's what this is about. We exchanged views, and before saying that we can take a break now and we can break for lunch, I want to introduce Rosa Maria Martinez, who is joining the seminar officially. So please put your hands together for the two speakers.